May 25, 2003. Quatro de Fevereiro Airport, Luanda, Angola. Shortly before sunset, air traffic controllers noticed something strange on the tarmac. A Boeing 727 is moving. The aircraft, bare silver metal with faded red, white, and blue stripes from its American Airlines days, begins taxiing without clearance. Controllers reach for their radios. No response. The plane maneuvers erratically toward the runway, weaving like a drunk driver on an empty highway. They try again. Nothing. The aircraft's lights are off. Its transponder, the device that broadcasts location and identity, has been switched off. The 727 enters the runway, accelerates, and lifts into the African sky, banking southwest toward the Atlantic Ocean. And then it's gone. No distress signal, no flight plan filed, no explanation. Just a commercial airliner vanishing into the golden light of an Angolan sunset. But here's where it gets insane. Neither of the two men believed to be on board was certified to fly a Boeing 727. The aircraft requires 3 trained crew members to operate. Ben Charles Padilla, a 51-year-old American, held only a private pilot license for small planes. He had never flown anything close to a 727. His assistant, John Mikel Mutantu, a Congolese mechanic, wasn't a pilot at all. 2 men, one massive aircraft they couldn't legally fly, 14,000 gallons of jet fuel, and less than 2 years after September 11th, a plane capable of reaching multiple major cities simply disappeared. The FBI launched a worldwide hunt. The CIA got involved. So did the NSA, the State Department, Homeland Security, and US Central Command. General Mastin Robeson, commander of American forces in the Horn of Africa, later said they considered moving fighter jets to Djibouti in response. For over 20 years, investigators have searched for answers. They found nothing. No wreckage on land or sea. No bodies. No debris. Not a single piece of evidence that this aircraft ever existed after that evening in Luanda. It is, according to aviation experts, the largest aircraft ever to have disappeared without a trace. So what happened to N844AA? Did 2 unqualified men steal a 727 and crash it into the ocean? Were they hijacked by someone waiting inside? Did they successfully land it somewhere and vanish? Or did someone orchestrate this entire thing from the ground? To understand how a commercial airliner can simply cease to exist, we need to go back to the beginning, back to a deal that was rotten from the start. The Boeing 727 that would vanish over the Atlantic had lived a respectable life. Manufactured in 1975, it served American Airlines for 25 years, accumulating over 68,000 flight hours and 43,000 takeoff and landing cycles. By airline standards, it was a workhorse that had earned its retirement. In 2000, American Airlines let it go. 2 years later, the aircraft ended up in the hands of Maury Joseph, president of a Miami company called Aerospace Sales and Leasing. Joseph had a buyer lined up almost immediately. Keith Irwin, a 57-year-old South African entrepreneur, wanted the plane for an unusual purpose. Angola had just emerged from decades of civil war. The roads were destroyed. Diamond mines in the interior needed diesel fuel to run their generators, and the only way to deliver it was by air. Irwin paid a $125,000 down payment on a $1 million deal, stripped out the passenger seats, and installed fuel tanks in the fuselage. In February 2002, the 727 departed Miami for Africa with a 6-person crew. It would never return to American soil. The problems started immediately. When the aircraft arrived in Luanda on March 14th, Angolan authorities grounded it. Missing paperwork, no high-frequency radio. The crew found themselves stranded in a country still reeling from war, their passports confiscated, living in an apartment without electricity or drinkable water near an open sewer. One flight engineer later said, "I was scared to death. I really thought I was going to die." Another crew member described the fuel delivery flights they eventually made as the most dangerous flying in the world. They had to spiral down to avoid small arms fire and land on unpaved clay runways in the middle of nowhere. By fall, the original American crew had fled back to the United States. The aircraft, battered from 17 brutal delivery flights, was practically worthless. Only the engines retained any real value. And then things got worse. Keith Irwin started noticing he was being followed. A local man named Antonio would appear in cars, watching him. Irwin began wedging a chair under his hotel room door handle at night, just like you see in the movies. One evening, he heard a keycard slide into the lock. The door started to open. Irwin screamed, and whoever it was ran. The next morning, he fled Angola, abandoning the aircraft on the tarmac. The 727 sat there for 14 months, hemorrhaging money. Airport fees piled up. Ownership became a tangled mess of competing claims. By spring 2003, Maury Joseph needed someone to go retrieve his airplane before it bled him dry completely. He knew exactly who to call. What Joseph didn't know was that Ben Padilla would never come home. Ben Charles Padilla Jr. was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of man you'd want handling a job like this. Born in Pensacola, Florida, the son of a millwright, he'd been mechanically gifted since childhood. His sister Benita described him as a John Wayne type, intimidating, like he's bulletproof. He'd learned to fly in his mid-20s, earned his certification as a flight engineer and aircraft mechanic, and built a career working in remote, dangerous locations across Africa. He had a fiancée of 15 years waiting for him in South Florida, 2 children, no criminal record, and a reputation for getting difficult jobs done. In April 2003, Joseph sent Padilla to Luanda to salvage the situation, pay the outstanding fines, hire local mechanics, get the 727 airworthy again, then fly it to Johannesburg, where a buyer was waiting for the engines. Padilla threw himself into the work. He partnered with Air Gemini, a local airline that operated a repair station, and hired a Congolese mechanic named John Mikel Mutantu to assist him. Almost nothing is known about Mutantu. No photographs of him exist online. The FBI found virtually no background information when they investigated. He remains a ghost in a story full of them. By early May, the aircraft was nearly ready. Joseph flew to Luanda himself to check on progress, gave Padilla $43,000 to pay airport fees, and received a faxed receipt confirming the payment. Padilla hired 2 qualified pilots from Air Gemini to handle the actual flight to Johannesburg. Everything was proceeding according to plan. On May 14th, Padilla sent an email to his sister Benita. Their mother had just suffered a heart attack. He told Benita he was in Africa and would call their mother as soon as he returned home. It was the last time his family ever heard from him. The day before the scheduled departure, Padilla arranged to take the aircraft from the hangar to the main runway for a systems check, running all 3 engines to full power, standard procedure before a long flight. Or perhaps, reconnaissance for something else entirely. On May 25th, shortly before sunset, Ben Padilla and John Mutantu boarded the 727. They had 53,000 litres of jet fuel on board, enough to fly approximately 1,500 miles. The qualified pilots Padilla had hired were not with them. What happened next would trigger one of the largest aviation manhunts in history, and it would answer absolutely nothing. The hunt. The morning after the disappearance, Maury Joseph was waiting at the Johannesburg airport with his buyer when his phone rang. An Air Gemini employee was on the line, demanding to know why another crew had flown the airplane out of Luanda. Joseph had no idea what the man was talking about. Within days, the disappearance had rippled up through intelligence channels to the highest levels of the American government. Less than 2 years after September 11th, a missing 727 wasn't just a theft. It was a potential weapon of mass destruction. General Mastin Robeson, who commanded US forces in the Horn of Africa at the time, later explained the response. Word of the 727 came up through the intelligence network. It was never clear whether it was stolen for insurance purposes by the owners. whether it was stolen with the intent to make it available to unsavory characters, or whether it was a deliberate, concerted terrorist attempt. There was speculation of all three. The FBI launched an investigation. The CIA joined. So did the NSA, the State Department, Homeland Security, and CENTCOM. Agents fanned out across Africa, focusing on countries like Nigeria, Guinea, and even Sri Lanka. They were looking for a plane that could theoretically be used to attack an embassy, a military base, or worse. In July 2003, they got their only lead. A Canadian pilot reported spotting the missing 727 on the ground in Conakry, Guinea. The aircraft appeared hastily repainted with a new registration number, but the old tail number was still visible underneath. By the time authorities arrived, the plane was gone. The State Department eventually dismissed the sighting entirely. The terrorism fears gradually subsided, though investigators never explained why. Perhaps satellite imagery showed evidence of a crash. Perhaps intelligence ruled out the threat. Whatever they found, they never shared it publicly. 2 years later, in 2005, the FBI closed the case without resolution. No charges filed, no perpetrator identified, no answers. The theories, however, multiplied. The most widely accepted theory is the simplest. Two men who had no business flying a 727 took off anyway and crashed into the Atlantic Ocean shortly after. The erratic taxiing suggests an unqualified pilot at the controls. 53,000 litres of fuel would eventually run out. The ocean is vast, and wreckage could sink or scatter without ever being found. Most people connected to the case believe this is what happened. But there are problems. No debris has ever washed ashore, no oil slick was detected, no distress signal was sent. After more than 20 years, the Atlantic has given up nothing. Others suspected insurance fraud. Maury Joseph had a troubled history. The SEC had previously charged him with falsifying financial statements and defrauding investors. He'd been fined and banned from serving as an officer in a publicly traded company. The aircraft was a liability, bleeding money every day it sat in Luanda. A theft would allow him to file an insurance claim and wash his hands of the whole disaster. But Joseph voluntarily took an FBI polygraph test. The buyer waiting for the engines vouched that Joseph's shock at the disappearance was genuine. And critically, no insurance was ever paid out. Joseph couldn't prove the aircraft had been stolen, so he couldn't collect. The FBI eventually cleared him. The Padilla family has their own theory. They believe Ben and Mutantu were ambushed by someone already hiding on the aircraft. Ben's brother Joe said he'd once told him that if terrorists ever tried to hijack a plane he was on, he would crash it rather than comply. The family believes Ben may have done exactly that, fighting back against unknown assailants and going down with the aircraft, rather than surrendering. I know my brother, Joe Padilla, told reporters, he's not going to do nothing crooked. I know that for a fact. Other theories abound. The Angolan Air Force shot it down. It flew north and crashed near Kinshasa, Congo. It landed at some remote airstrip in sub-Saharan Africa and was disassembled for parts. One of Padilla's friends claims it was scrapped in Bujumbura, Burundi. None of these theories have ever been verified. The journalist Tim Wright spent years investigating the case for Air and Space magazine, filing Freedom of Information requests, interviewing everyone involved. His conclusion, published in 2010, was devastating in its honesty. I found a story of broken deals, disappointments, and betrayals, but no real clues to the aircraft's destination that day in 2003. We may never know for sure where it went. It is the largest aircraft ever to have disappeared without a trace. More than 20 years later, Ben Charles Padilla remains officially listed as a missing person. His FBI wanted poster circulated for years. His family never got a body to bury, never got answers, never got closure. Benita Padilla Kirkland spent years trying to convince the FBI to reopen her brother's case. She passed along every possible sighting, every rumor, every desperate lead. In interviews, she clung to the thinnest thread of hope. I keep hoping against hope, she said, that maybe he's tucked away somewhere. The stress of not knowing hospitalized her brother Joe with a heart blockage. Their mother, the one Ben had promised to call, spent her final years wondering what happened to her son. John Mikel Mutantu has been almost entirely forgotten. No family members came forward. No friends told his story. He exists in the historical record only as a name on a list of the missing. A man who boarded an aircraft one evening in Angola and was never seen again. The aircraft itself, N844AA, remains the subject of dark fascination among aviation enthusiasts and true crime obsessives. Online forums still debate what happened. Conspiracy theories multiply with each passing year. The truth, whatever it is, lies somewhere in the African sky or beneath the Atlantic waves. Here's what we know for certain. 2 men boarded a plane they couldn't fly. They took off without clearance, without communication, without lights. They headed southwest over the ocean and vanished. The legitimate flight to Johannesburg was scheduled for the very next day. Padilla had already hired qualified pilots. If they had simply waited 24 hours, none of this would have happened. Why didn't they wait? What happened in those final hours that made them take off alone, unqualified, into the gathering darkness? Did someone force them? Did something go wrong? Did Ben Padilla, the John Wayne type who'd worked in dangerous places his whole life, finally encounter something he couldn't handle? We may never know. But the mystery of N844AA endures because it represents something deeply unsettling. This happened less than 2 years after September 11th, when the entire world was supposed to be on high alert for exactly this kind of incident. A Boeing 727, capable of reaching multiple cities, simply vanished. And despite the combined resources of the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the entire American intelligence apparatus, no one ever found it. If that could happen in 2003, what else is slipping through the cracks? What other planes, what other threats, what other mysteries are out there, waiting to be discovered, or waiting to stay hidden forever? But N844AA isn't the only aircraft to vanish without a trace. In 2014, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people disappeared over the Indian Ocean, triggering the largest search in aviation history. And what investigators found might be even more disturbing than what they didn't find.